Hey there, race fans. It's Race Day Top 5 with me, Frank 5. Daytona, the world center of racing, the track where everybody, no matter what race it is, whether it's a points race, whether it's an exhibition race, everybody wants to win at the world center of racing. And on the day where we had the regular season finale postponed a day late due to Mother Nature, we had chaos with Mother Nature on the racetrack and chaos in the end when it came to deciding the final few spots in the playoffs with a walk-off win from a legendary number to punch your ticket to the playoffs. Let's get into the craziness that went down in Florida today. Number 1, Austin Dillon driving the famed number 3 car, a car that a few years ago he went to victory lane with in the Daytona 500 in 2018, a number that's been successful at Daytona for many, many years with the Big E, Dale Earnhardt driving behind the wheel, and the guy took 20 years until he won the Daytona 500 in 1998. Today, Austin Dillon pulls off a walk-off win at Daytona, going from outside the playoffs to winning the Coke Zero Sugar 400 at Daytona, holding off his teammate Tyler Reddick, Austin Cindric, Landon Castle, and Noah Gragson to get into the playoffs. Austin Dillon, coming into this race, knew he needed to win, and he knew that he needed a good race car to get the job done. Well, at one point in the race, he got himself in the top 10, then he drifted back. But late in the race, it looked like his playoff opportunity was taken away from him. In a wreck coming off of turn number 4 that took out a couple of guys that were trying to win to make it in, Austin Dillon was caught up in the incident and spun around and ended up losing a lap in the process. Well, then on a restart a few laps later, we had another wreck, and Dillon, by result of being the first car lap down in that caution, got the free pass. Then, going into turn number 1, a massive accident happened, and we'll get into that topic a little bit later, and it's a juicy one, obviously. But through all the chaos in that wreck, Austin Dillon moved to the apron of the racetrack to avoid all the wrecked cars and came out with the lead. And then Mother Nature arrived at the track after a long wait. She finally arrived, and she held to the race for 3+ hours. And at that time, with Dillon the leader, looked like it was game over. He was the winner. He was going to make the playoffs. But NASCAR said, nope, we are going to hold off, wait for a window, dry the track, and let the fans have a finish. And they did. We restarted the race with about 20 laps to go. Austin Dillon had the lead. Then he lost the lead in the process to Austin Cindric, who at the time was already in the playoffs based off of his win at Daytona earlier this year in the 500. Austin Dillon knew the only way to get in was to pass the 2 car. And a couple laps to go, about 4 to go, in turn number 1, Dillon bumped into the back of the 2 car of Cindric, sending him a little bit loose, but Cindric held onto it, and Dillon took the lead. And right behind him, the guy he needed behind him to help protect him, to give him the opportunity to try to win, his teammate Tyler Reddick. Teamwork made the difference at the very end with those two, and a lot of guys behind him not really having that fast race cars, and also guys that were pretty much damaged for the most part. Dillon held them all off and punched his ticket to the playoffs. Now, of course, Austin Dillon, he could have made the playoffs last year, if you remember correctly, but in the last lap, a couple of spots from moving up a few positions that he needed to get in and beat out his teammate, he was caught up in a wreck on the backstretch going into turn 3 on the last lap. He was a part of it and ultimately eliminated him and allowed his teammate Tyler Reddick to get in. This year, however, both of the Richard Childress cars are in the playoffs. We've seen the strength of Tyler Reddick as of late, especially on road courses, and we saw how good the 8 car was today. And finishing second with a damaged car, by the way, impressive. But the 3 car of Austin Dillon, we know how good of a super speedway racer he was. But remember 2 years ago, he made the playoffs based off of his win in Texas. And he was really strong in the first round. Had he not had a bad couple of races like the power issue in Vegas, being involved in a wreck late at Talladega, and a pretty rough race at the Roval, not really being consistent, he could have made it to the round of 8 and been the spoiler. Nothing is out of the question with this new car. Austin Dillon could make a deep run. I don't believe he will, but a big win for him in the 3 team. Of course, it's been a big year for Austin Dillon in a way. Of course, his reality series, Life in the Fastlane on USA Network, has been airing. It just aired the final episode, actually, this past Thursday. I actually watched it. Of course, it was one of his crew members that he's been friends with a long time, and him and his wife gave birth to their lovely baby girl, and they were all at the track, and Whitney was doing the rain dance during the rain delay, and it looked like she was praying, let the rain come, let it and call it. They went back to racing. But Austin Dillon was still able to preserve on top, and now he's a playoff driver. So congrats to Austin Dillon and the whole number 3 team. They're going to the playoffs. Number 2, the battle for the final spot ends up with one guy in, one guy out. Ryan Blaney beats Martin Truex Jr. by 3 points. 3 points to make it in as the only driver on points into the playoffs. Before we get into the chaos that they both dealt with this playoff battle, I need to quickly tell you guys this. On Thursday, it was announced that Kurt Busch made the announcement that due to his health right now, he will not be able to compete in the playoffs. He's not going to be able to run at Darlington next weekend. He's still focusing on his health, and we wish Kurt a speedy recovery. We hope to have him by the end of the year. So his playoff waiver was officially taken away. So entering the race, instead of Truex being out, he was now back in, still trying to battle Ryan Blaney for points. Well, early in the race, with 5 to go in stage 1, Ryan Blaney was caught up in a crash coming off of turn number 2. And when you looked at that race car, you thought, yep, that's it. He's not going to be able to continue because the right front wheel, the toe link, was knocked out, and I felt like they're going to have a tough time repairing that. Well, they fixed it. Even with the right front hood kind of pretty damaged severely, they were still able to meet minimum speed and continue on throughout the rest of the race. However, the car was nowhere near competitive worthy to compete for the win. That car was really damaged, and he just was a few seconds slower than the pack. But he stayed in the game. He kept running the rest of the race. He had to hope that other guys would fall out of the race. While that was happening, Martin Truex Jr. capitalized on Blaney's misfortune with stage points in both stages. 6 points in stage 1, 9 points in stage 2. Nearly got the stage win. And it looked like Truex was in a position to point his way in, even if we had gotten a new winner, because he was plenty of spots ahead of Blaney, and he accumulated stage points when Blaney couldn't. Well, in the beginning of the final stage, on the backstretch, Truex himself was involved in a crash. However, unlike Blaney, that car was able to continue and keep up with the draft. He just hung at the back because he said that the car, it was kind of bouncing up and down, so there was some suspension damage to the car, but they still continued on with the pack. They dodged a couple of wrecks late, and when we restarted the race, he was in the top 5, and it looked like he was going to make it in. But because of the damage to the car, he started to lose the pack of those guys, even with the less amount of cars out there, guys that were mostly damaged, guys that don't really necessarily have quite the competitive speed, like your typical Hendrick, Gibbs, Penske, Stewart-Haas group. Truex just couldn't keep up with those guys, and he slipped back, and he settled for an 8th place finish. Ryan Blaney passed a lot of guys that fell out due to wrecks, and finishing 6 laps down in 15th is enough to put Blaney into the playoffs, and Martin Truex Jr., unfortunately, is out. So we're left wondering what might have been for Martin Truex. Why did he not make the playoffs? Well, I think you got to look at the road course program this year. Awful. I mean, awful. No top 10s, I think, in any of those races. No stage wins. Not even a single lap led. That 19 car was nowhere near the front of the road course this year, which shocked people like me because Martin Truex Jr. is an incredible road course racer. He's won a road course. He's run in the top 5 and top 10 and finished there even if he doesn't have a race-winning car. Their road course program this year is what probably cost them a lot of those points. And then some of the races that they had in the summer, like Nashville, an opportunity to finish in the top 5, they pitted late and they really never gained a lot of spots, finishing outside the top 20. That is going to be looked back as a race where they lost a lot of points and couldn't capitalize. But so it's like some of these wins that have come late in the season, like, Daniel Suarez winning, Tyler Reddick winning, Christopher Bell winning, Kevin Harvick winning, and of course Austin Dillon winning today, put them out of the playoffs. I mean, it looked like they were going to get in with Blaney's misfortune, but unfortunately, it's Blaney that's in, and Martin Truex Jr. will not be competing for the championship in 2022. This also is shocking considering the fact that he announced that he is coming back to JGR next year, even though there was a lot of question about, is he going to be with Gibbs next year, or is he going to retire? He's coming back next year, and hopefully next year he's got a lot of fire in him to get back to the playoffs. The best thing they could do for this year is try to win some races at the end of the year to get momentum on their side to get ready to bounce back in 2023. As for Ryan Blaney fans, congrats, you're in the playoffs. And finishing second in the point standings and getting those extra points based off your seeding will help you, but I think you're going to need a win to make a deep run. So you better make a deep run, guys, or else you're going to be pretty bitter if you don't win a race this year. Number 3, chaos in turn 1. So, as I mentioned, Austin Dillon dodged a big wreck in turn number 1 to take the lead before the rain delay, and of course we got back going, and Austin Dillon won the race. The rest is history. Well, the big controversial moment of the day is the chaos in turn one with about 25 laps to go. Daniel Suarez in the lead with a lot of guys hounding him, guys that needed to win to make the playoffs. Eric Jones, Eric Almirola, Chris Buescher, Justin Haley, a lot of those guys, they needed to win to make the playoffs. They were hounding that number 99 at the front. Well, going to turn one, all of a sudden, cars started spinning and crashing into each other. A lot of guys taken out. Denny Hamlin, Kevin Harvick, Chase Elliott, who'd already locked up the regular season championship, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. A lot of those guys were taking out that big wreck in turn one. Harrison Burton, Ty Dillon, a lot of those guys. And people were wondering, somebody must have bumped into somebody. But when we looked at the replays, there was no contact. People were just starting to spin out and wreck each other. And we went on one of the onboards. It turned out it was raining in turn one. And it wasn't a heavy downpour. It was just like light drizzles, and that was enough to send these cars spinning around. Now, a lap before that all happened, Justin Haley came on the radio and said, it's sprinkling in turn one. You might as well throw the yellow. However, Kyle Busch, who was in the middle of that pack, said otherwise, saying it's not raining really in turn one the lap before everything went to chaos. And a lot of people were pointing the finger at NASCAR for not calling the caution for rain sooner rather than later. Well, during the rain delay, the Vice President of Communications, Scott Miller, who used to be a NASCAR crew chief for RCR and a competition manager for MWR a couple years ago, he came up into the booth and explained what went down in turn one. And he said, it was kind of out of our control because it's Florida and it's the weather and you can't predict when the rain's going to come. Even though the spotters were even complaining as much as the drivers were, it's starting to rain a little bit in the tri-oval going into turn one. Well, when they went through the tri-oval on the lap that a few seconds before the wreck happened, it wasn't really raining that hard to send guys out of control. But when you get to turn one where there's heavy banking and there's not a lot of grip there, I can understand that. But Scott Miller saying it was kind of out of our control and there's nothing we could do about it. I know there are fans who are going to say, yeah, you're making that up. Yeah, you're just trying to cover the sanctioning body. To be quite honest, I agree with him. They can't predict when the weather's coming. We saw the rain cells. We knew they were coming. We just didn't know it was going to get there in turn number one. We didn't know it was going to magically sprinkle onto the track like light drizzles was enough to send all those cars spinning and crashing around. There's nothing we could do about that, in all honesty. I mean, you can whine about it and you can complain about it, but, it's a tough call to make. I mean, when the cars wreck, I mean, rain happens. I mean, could they have maybe seen it sooner? Yeah, I mean, they have officials around the racetrack, but they didn't really think it was that enough to send the cars spinning around, and unfortunately did. I mean, there are a lot of people that are going to pin NASCAR, with this and say it looks really bad for the sport, that it gives them a bad look. I don't think it gives them a bad look necessarily. It's just, they happen. It's the Florida weather. What are you going to do about it? You can't, it's out of your control, basically. So I'm not going to pin any blame really on NASCAR for this. It's just, it happens. And yeah, but there are a lot of people saying better officiating. Denny Hamlin was one of those people. Well, let's see how this transpires down the road. Let's see if they agree with the drivers or if they feel like it wasn't really in their control about the weather. So it was a really ugly moment right there in turn number one. Number 4, chaos. Other than that big wreck in turn one, there was chaos the entire race. So as I mentioned, 5 laps to go in stage number 1, there was a wreck that involved Ryan Blaney. How it happened, Denny Hamlin bump drafting Eric Jones in the corners, which you shouldn't do because it'll set off a chain reaction, and he was kind of driving over his head right there. Send him a little bit loose. They were able to hold on to it, but unfortunately guys behind him like Christopher Bell went around and he ricocheted into traffic and collected Ryan Blaney. It also took out Brad Keselowski. He was not able to compete for the win. Kevin Harvick got some damage, but he continued on until that big wreck in turn 1. That was the first major wreck of the day. The second major wreck was towards the beginning of stage number 3. Down the back straightaway, Michael McDowell, who took no tires on the pit stop leading up to the final stage, he got bumped from behind by Tyler Reddick, and he went straight into the wall and ricocheted into traffic, which collected Ross Chastain, Corey LaJoie, William Byron, and that wreck also included Martin Truex Jr. Truex was the only one that was able to continue on and at least compete for the win or at least run well. The other guys, unfortunately, were taken out of the race, and Michael McDowell could have had an opportunity to win because he's good in these super speedways. I mean, he won the 500 last year, and I don't really agree. I never agreed with him taking no tires on that pit stop. You needed the tires because it doesn't necessarily make you faster unless you maneuver your race car better than other guys probably would on 2 tires. Because most of the people that came and pitted for tires before the final stage took 4 tires. So for him to not take any tires, they'll look back and think, not really good. Then there was a wreck off of turn number 4 where Alex Bowman bumped into the back of Chase Briscoe, who kind of threw a little bit of a late block, although it's tough to tell. But Briscoe went ricocheting into traffic, collected Bowman, collected Ricky Stenhouse, Todd Gilliland, Harrison Burton, Bubba Wallace, a lot of guys. This wreck even included our eventual race winner, Austin Dillon. I mean, he spun around in the pit lane with just minimal damage, and he got lapped in the process, and of course, the rest is history. He got his lap back, and he ended up winning the race. But a wreck took out Chase Briscoe, who laid back at the start and started to make his way to the front of the final stage and had a chance to win. It took out a couple of guys and gave him some damage, but they were able to continue on. There was another wreck off of turn 2 where Joey Logano and Eric Jones went around. And obviously, I mentioned the big wreck in turn number 1 with the rain coming down. There was just a lot of chaos. It was a really chaotic race with a lot of these wrecks. I know fans love wrecks, but not to the entire field. It takes the fun out of it, shall we say. It's just, I get it. Everyone's going aggressive. It's the last race of the regular season. Everyone's trying to win to make the playoffs if you're outside the cutoff line. But, I mean, some guys drove aggressively over their heads and set off these wrecks. It happens, but it's a byproduct of this type of racing that we have. Close quarters, side-by-side action, 195 miles per hour racing, and sometimes these guys get into each other and sets off chain reactions, sets off these wrecks. There's a lot of, the experience has changed over the years. We have a lot of guys in their early 20s, late 20s that don't necessarily have a lot of experience with this, where we still have some of the veterans that are in their early 30s, late 30s, early 40s that know how to draft. And obviously, when experience mixes with inexperience, it can set off major accidents. And there was a lot of it today. There was a lot of banged up cars going home, and everybody's going to have to repair those things before we go to Talladega in just about a month and a week from now. So it's really, really tough to process all this type of racing that we saw at the very end. It is what it is. It's Daytona Super Speedway racing, but it's just a lot of chaos, and you don't really want to see everybody wrecked. That's the thing. And number 5, the playoff grid is now officially set. They are as followed: Chase Elliott, your regular season champion; Joey Logano, Ross Chastain, Kyle Larson, William Byron, Denny Hamlin, Ryan Blaney, even with no wins, Tyler Reddick, Kevin Harvick, Christopher Bell, Kyle Busch, Daniel Suarez, Chase Briscoe, Austin Cindric, Alex Bowman, and Austin Dillon. Those are your 16 men that will be competing for the Bill France Cup, the 10-race stretch to get to Phoenix and win the championship and be your 2022 NASCAR Cup Series champion. All the Hendrick cars made it. Both the RCR cars made it. 2 cars out of the Stewart-Haas stable made it. All 3 Penske cars made it. 3 out of the 4 Gibbs cars made it. Both Trackhouse cars, in their second year as a team, made it into the playoffs. It's a pretty interesting group of drivers and teams in the mix that are championship worthy, with the unpredictability of the season with the next-gen car. Any one of those drivers from any one of those teams on any given Saturday or Sunday race can win this championship. What's it going to take for these guys to win? No mistakes, winning races, consistency, and more importantly, staying in the game even if you have a problem. Any mistake, a wreck, an engine, a pit penalty, not a good handling race car, could cost you a chance to get to Phoenix and win a championship. It's a team effort in sport. Obviously, we all know in football, baseball, basketball, and hockey, it's a team sport. It's a team sport in NASCAR between the driver, the crew chief, the spotter, and the team pitting that race car. All it takes is good chemistry. And great chemistry can win you a Cup Series championship. One of these 16 men, at the end of the season in Phoenix, will have the opportunity to hoist the Bill France Cup and say, we did it. We're champs, boys. Any one of those guys can win. Who's it going to be? Well, that's the fun in all this, especially with this next-gen car. I don't know, but there's a couple of guys I feel like have a really good opportunity to be champion this year. I'll more than likely be doing a preview video about what I think is going to happen in the playoffs, who's going to advance out of each round, who's going to make it to Phoenix, and who could end up winning the championship. I'll do that on Thursday and break down the drivers that are in and basically say who I think gets eliminated each round and which 4 drivers make it to Phoenix and which one of those will win the championship. The playoff grid is now officially set. The regular season's in the books. It's now playoff time, so no Jim Mora. Playoffs? I'm trying to win a race or I'm trying to win a game. None of that. It's now playoff time. It's time to go to work, boys. The 10-race stretch to Phoenix Raceway for the season finale 500 starts next Sunday at Darlington Raceway, one of the most iconic racetracks, the egg-shaped track, the old worn-out surface, one of the most iconic races in our sport, the Southern 500, Cookout Southern 500 to be specific. Those drivers need to come out of Darlington next weekend with a good run. If you have a bad race next Sunday, you could be in the hole for the next 2 races at Kansas and Bristol. The playoffs are officially set, and it's time to go racing for a championship. Who will come out on top next week at Darlington and be the first driver to advance to the next round? That remains to be seen. I'll do my prediction about what's going to happen in the playoffs this upcoming Thursday, and I hope you all tune into that. With that being said, the chaos of Daytona is done, and it's time to go playoff racing. So thank you so much for watching. Subscribe, like. Congrats to Austin Dillon on his big win at Daytona, and congrats to the 16 drivers that are competing for the NASCAR Cup Series Championship. Thank you all so much for watching. Have a wonderful week, and I hope you all have a wonderful week leading up to your Labor Day weekend. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and let's go racing for championship.